Welcome to the Partnernomics Show, where industry thought leaders discuss the hottest topics in partnerships, ecosystems, and innovation. The Partnernomics Show is brought to you by IOLite Solutions, a product incubator specific to Salesforce. Now here's the host of the Partnernomics Show, Mark Brigman.
All right, Mr. Chris, how you doing? It's good to hang out with you again. Good to see you. 2022, big stuff coming for us.
It's already here, man. How you doing, Mark?
Good. A little bit cold, but other than that, doing really well, man. I'm really excited to have you be one of the contributors. I know as I think back to my career jumping in, the legal side of understanding partnerships was probably one of the more challenging side of the world that I came from at Sprint. We drafted a lot of our own contracts. So we used certain templates, but we were expected to understand what indemnification was, limitation of liability, all these different pieces that, I know a lot of partnering professionals, they may not necessarily be responsible for drafting those pieces, but I've always had a real appreciation for the legal side, and definitely for awesome, cool, fun lawyers like you that are willing to jump in, kind of share some of the tricks of the trade, share some insights. So, man, I'm super excited to have you be one of the contributors to the Partnernomics Show.
Lawyers can be people too, right?
Exactly. They're not all bad.
No, I'm honored that you reached out. This is a lot of fun, and I think it's pretty informative stuff. It's you got a lot of great content with what you put out there, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it, Mark.
So, Chris, talk to us a little bit about you, your law firm that you own, founded, and lead. You're specifically a litigator. So what exactly does that mean?
So, man, so I get called by companies who get sued. I say companies and professionals. When they get sued, I'm one of the folks that they call, and I take on the litigation and handle the negotiations with the other party. And if worst comes to worst, we have to arbitrate or try it, which happens sometimes. After close to 20 years of practicing with other firms, I started my own gig last January, 2021. It's been a blast, which is why it's kind of fun that you reached out to me, because I have a little bit of that founder's perspective, in addition to having that lawyer perspective. So that's why I've been following your great content, particularly mission statement, vision statement, core values. And I mean, boy, that just keeps us focused. It's great, great
awesome,
stuff.
Man. Well, like I said, you've obviously been a contributor to our content in years past. You help us put some stuff together. Definitely appreciate that. But man, I love just the unique perspective that you have, because if we do this thing right on the front end, we don't necessarily hopefully won't need litigation on the back end, but when we do, it's awesome to have really smart, seasoned professionals like yourself that can help those individuals and those companies, just to protect their rights and to resolve these issues. So.
Absolutely. And what happens quite a bit is when companies will reach out knowing that, I've had to go to the mat a few times for other companies, and they'll reach out for the perspective before a lawsuit's filed, right? And so that gives me a good opportunity with smaller companies, particularly around town, I've worked with to help them with the documents, their contracts, and more importantly, to get them to the right people when the issues are more thorny or when the issues are more detailed or specialized. And that's a lot of fun for me too, to keep tied to the folks in my area who are doing different types of law.
Yeah. So let's jump in. Let's jump into the show. Let's hit our first question. I can't wait to hit you with this one and see what you think. So the question I have for you is, should businesses use click-through agreements? So I know in our world of partnering, we have, say, different, especially kind of those affiliate referral partnerships, we're just kind of this click-through agreement. This is kind of how it's going to work. Or even just as a consumer, right? I download Facebook, I download LinkedIn. There's particular, agreements there. I guess kind of my core question is, do these click-through agreements hold as much weight as a traditional written agreement?
Well, as much weight, yeah, I think they do. Most courts are looking at them saying, yeah, if there's a click and an acceptance of terms and conditions, the courts are going to treat it pretty much like a written contract. Are there downfalls to it? Sure. It's easier to make the language a little bit more hidden, a little bit more hard to see, right, for the person who's clicking through it. And there are traps for sure. When you're dealing with a hard written contract, a tactile learner like me, it's a little bit easier for me to absorb and see those terms.
Has there been cases that you're aware of that where, say, I know for me, whenever I download an app or I see these click-through agreements, it'd be different if I was signing up to be like, say, a referral partner, but I know like these click-through agreements, man, shame on me, but I only read like 0.01% of those. Is there, and I may be the only person in the world I know, but does that change like the hooks that's in the agreement at all, or might a judge say, you know, maybe there's some clause in there where this is maybe unreasonable? Does that lighten the load at all, or am I still just as responsible?
It depends. What I've seen in the courts for the most part are, if you click something, an affirmative action where, you know, some of them will have a box that says, hey, by proceeding, I'm agreeing to these terms and conditions, right? And they click the box and they click yes. That's going to be notice. That's going to be actual notice more times than not that there's something more to this deal than just what you're buying. You know, there are others where, you know, something will pop up on the screen. It'll say, by continuing on this website, you're agreeing to our terms and conditions. I think the language for that's called browse wrap. Whereas, you know, proceeding with an order or something, and there's a box that comes up saying, here's the terms and conditions, that's click wrap is kind of the lingo. Both have been enforced by courts, but what we have to remember is any contract, which that's a contract, requires a mutual assent, and both parties are tasked with knowing what the deal is. If you're trying to sneak something through there that's going to be very, very hidden from the user's view, getting them to agree to it, it's really going to be on you to enforce that with the court, which, as we all know, takes time, it takes money, it takes lawyers. And then you got to ask yourself, what's the cost of winning?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
at the end of the day. So what I've seen is, man, you just got to make it really, really clear. One thing that I have advised some of my clients about is, when you have something like that come up saying, hey, you're clicking here for the terms and conditions, put out your top 3 or 4 right there in the box. And I have a handful that almost always I will recommend to my clients that they need to put out there on that initial terms and conditions box, because there are a few things that you want to absolutely make sure the buyer or the partner knows.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, it seems that there probably is a spot, a space for sure for these kind of click through, very convenient agreements. That's the beauty of them, I think, is because they are convenient. But as I think about partnering contracts and partnering relationships, kind of the deeper, the more truly strategic we're going to have and be as partners, to the point that you're bringing, Chris, you want them to overtly know and agree and commit to whatever it is you need. And in that case, we need to make sure that they are fully aware.
Well, sure. And is it your experience that, generally speaking, whenever you have that level of strategy and that strategic partnership, are you going to have a conversation?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. I mean, you're definitely going to have those conversations. So for sure, the click-through agreements, would not fit in that space. But, I think for different more sales or referral or kind of lead generation sort of relationships, I think from a partnering perspective, it definitely makes sense to have these click-through agreements. But just be mindful of what you have there, what the expectations are. But I really love what you pointed out there, Chris, and that is, if you want them to really perform something, you need to make sure they know, put that up top. Make sure they see that first. And hopefully they're unlike me and actually read some of those terms. Mm-hmm. All right, so time's up.
Oh, good.
Next question.
So one thing that I had for you on that note, we're talking about these back and forth, you have click-throughs, the strategic partnerships. One thing that often is litigated on those types of agreements is this whole issue of exclusivity. And I'm curious from your perspective, I mean, you have this experience when you're setting up these strategic partnerships with someone, and are there times where it's valuable to have exclusivity, and are there times where it's really just, I mean, not the right way to go? How do you distinguish that?
Awesome question. And I'm still to this day, I'm surprised at how many times I'm reading through, say, blogs or these different things, or listening to a podcast, and I hear somebody say, never agree to exclusivity, right? Because we're breaking into jail, we're putting on the handcuffs. And I think that's the worst advice that you could be given relative to exclusivity. And so I think the danger or the challenge, or where exclusivity goes bad, is when a company or a partner agrees to exclusivity, but there's no obligation to perform. There's no get out of jail card. And so here's the way that I play it. And I love exclusivity, especially in highly strategic deals. So the iPhone in 2006, when Apple and AT&T contracted, they launched the iPhone in 2007, there was a 5-year exclusive relationship, right? So the mere fact that Apple, an absolute beast, and AT&T, that they agreed to it, it's probably not all bad. But here's like the approach. The thing that I love about exclusivity is, especially for highly strategic partnerships, maybe you're co-creating, you're doing something for the first time, you're building this recipe for success. It can simplify a relationship significantly and really channel, that value and that energy. And the other key is, just like Apple did, is make it time bound, but use and utilize exclusivity as a way to get focus, but just simplify the business. So like the case of AT&T or Apple, Apple did not have to work with Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile and AT&T. They knew they had a big elephant to eat, and it just made sense for them to simplify, learn, build out all these massive processes for this national deployment of the iPhone. And then you're ready for kind of stage 2, and you can bring other people, into the mix. I'd love to get your take on that as well.
With what you're describing, I mean, there's not a cookie cutter answer. And I know that's a lawyer in me saying, golly, there's no absolutes. And there really isn't. If it's a big enough project I can't do on my own, you can't do on your own, but we can do it together. I think exclusivity is huge because, what's one of the key components of risk? Keep in mind, we're all looking to minimize risk, right? And one of the key components to risk is uncertainty. Well, exclusivity gives you a certainty. You don't have to worry about me going to your competitor next year, next week. You can put your resources today into the deal. Likewise, when I'm looking in my future planning, strategic planning for the next 3 years, I know that I'm going to be somewhat safe, that you're not going to just jettison me and my work. But one of the key issues in my mind with that exclusivity is, just like a marriage, how do we fight?
Yeah. I
mean, we have to assume that we're not going to foresee everything that could come up. But what we can foresee is, how are we going to handle that, Mark? If some elephant plops down in our room and we've got to address it, how are we going to do that? And my sense is, with these exclusivity agreements, that's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it'd be a great topic for us to hit in another episode, is like the whole kind of this. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot to that one, a lot to unpack. Hey, let's toss over. I want to, we'll kill the clock on this one. Let's go to the next question that I want to ask you. And that is, well, you mentioned terms of service earlier. And, like whenever we download these apps, sometimes we go in and we work on in these particular websites, we see this terms of service. Or if I step into an app that I haven't been into for a while, hey, maybe it's Google, right? We've updated our terms of service. Click here, check it out, go read it, those sorts of things. What exactly is a terms of service? Should companies use it as, say a SaaS company that's out there? Is it imperative that they have a terms of service? What will it do for them? Will it protect them at all?
Right, the TOS, the term of service, it's also the DTR, I call it, the define the relationship. I mean, it's like, who are we? What are we doing? And how are we proceeding? And, the question I think sometimes comes out, do you need terms of service? And again, I'm almost entirely anti-absolute, which is funny because I'm not even absolute about being anti-absolute, but you almost always need some kind of term of service because you got to define, hey, how are we going to proceed? The problem is, man, sometimes us lawyers get a hold of those things and we wordsmith it to death. You end up with a 48-page document that no one's ever going to read. And chances are in that 48-page document, there's going to be an ambiguity or 8 where, and if I'm the drafter of this document, and if you don't have a choice in signing it, if you want to buy my product, you have to sign it. Any ambiguity is going to generally be construed against the drafter. Yeah. The longer this document is, the more risk there is for ambiguity. And that's why a lot of times what I will look for is a carve out. Let's identify the top 3 or 4 things that are important to this relationship. More times than not, when I look at something and I tell a client, one of the key things is choice of venue. And this define the relationship deal that we have. If something goes wrong and you're going to sue me, you're going to sue me here in my backyard. And what happens is if you're selling products, for example, online, and these products are $800, and you sell one to somebody in Rhode Island, and that person files a lawsuit in Rhode Island, your $800 is already gone. It's already gone. You got to find a lawyer up there. You may have to fly up there. You have to litigate in Rhode Island, but with a simple clause, and almost every court that I've seen will enforce a clear clause. It's a choice of venue. If you're going to buy my product, if you're going to sue me, you got to do it here. Well, and all of a sudden, the person who was wanting to sue you has to find their lawyer here. Right. And so that's one of the critical things that almost always you can do on these terms of service. Call that one out, make it very clear. Some people are big and go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the choice of venue that you shared, I definitely want to hit you with that question at a future episode, because that's one that always seems to make its way into agreements. A lot of times we don't even really put a second of thought into it. A lot of times smaller organizations, if we're looking at somebody else's paper, the bigger company, that sumo, we don't even really put a second of thought into it, and maybe don't even really understand the ramifications of that. So it'd be good to take a deeper dig into that one into the future. But yeah, the whole terms of service piece, it is interesting because, what kind of weight comes with it? How often should we update it? What does it even need to cover? It seems like there's a lot of topics there. And I would imagine over the last decade, since so many with SaaS, all these different software companies, that's stepping up, I would imagine that the courts are probably trying to define that maybe a little bit better as to what goes into the terms of service and what does it actually even mean.
Well, there's been cases in the last 6 months, to your point about how often do we update it. That's certainly one question, but the secondary question to that is, when we update it, how do we roll it out? Does the update today apply to products I sold a year and a half ago? And if not, why not? And how can we make that happen? And those issues are being litigated. If you update a material term, back to the mutual assent thing that we talked about earlier, can you establish that there was mutual assent? There may be some good strategic ways to do that, but those are certainly issues that are popping out. But as long as you have those top 3 or 4 things that you're hammering and are not likely to change, a lot of times that's going to be a great way to at least take that level of control over the transaction.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. All right, we're ready for the next question. Time's up.
Yeah, so one thing, you and I have talked about this on a handful of occasions. I think others can benefit from your experience here and maybe our contrasting views on the issue. But when it comes to lawyer selection, first off, almost never is someone super excited about the fact that they have to get a lawyer involved in something. I'm friends with a lot of my clients. I know, right? And I'm friends with almost all of my clients, and they always make fun of me, like, you're the friend I don't want to have. But, but when you're doing that, I mean, you on this business work and in your business experience have had all kinds of issues, from fairly generic legal issues to overarching strategic issues that you need to bounce off of your lawyer, to very in the trenches, detail oriented. We need this to be 100% right with no, we need it to be done how it's always been done. How do you manage all of those lawyers? I mean, that's because that's a lot of different disciplines.
Yeah, man, that's an awesome question. And I think there's definitely some insights behind this one. And that is, we all say that not all customers are created equal. Well, not all partners are created equal, and not all partnerships are created equal. Partnerships are on this very vast continuum between one side being highly transactional, procurement, supply chain management, could be sales, just very kind of commoditized. There's a recipe, a script, not a ton of unknowns. A lot of this we can nail out, right? Think of, MSAs, master services agreements, these massive documents. We've been down this road a bunch of different times. And so we've learned from that. So we built this ironclad MSA. Well, the opposite end of the spectrum, and really this is the world that we're seeing now in ecosystems, in strategic alliances, in co-creation, where we're building new software packages, we're building these new creations, we're doing deeper integrations with multiple solutions, both hardware, software, analytics packages, these sorts of things. That's a different world. And it's been my experience working with attorneys that if I'm working with an attorney that has spent most of his or her life writing and drafting MSAs, they're going to be challenged and stretched and be really uncomfortable with creating documents, creating contracts that are going to be focused on highly strategic, high innovation, this co-creation, intellectual property development sort of a relationship. What has been your thoughts, or what's your take on that?
Well, no, absolutely. There's a couple of things. One, it's experiential, right? Some lawyers have done what they've done for the last 80 years, and that's the only way they're going to think about things, right? But it's also some personality, some characteristics, right? And we all know those extraordinarily detail-oriented people that may struggle with creative strategy. And we may also know some of those creative strategists who will never get into the details, and lawyers are no different in that regard. We maybe have a greater percentage of type A people in our profession, but we still have those different characteristics that any given client will want to look for. And, one thing that has worked with a lot of, my folks is having that trust in a lawyer or a small team of lawyers to know that those lawyers are going to be able to handle the load as a general rule. But sometimes that load involves identifying the issues or issue spotting and pulling another lawyer in who's the right fit. And so, for example, with those MSAs, you may have one lawyer managing those and give that lawyer permission to say, look, these strategies are a little bit out of my world, but I know another lawyer in town here who can help. Let me bring her in. And that's a great relationship for a lot of these businesses to have, whether that lawyer is inside the company or outside the company.
I think that makes a ton of sense, Chris. And, to have this really is, I think, a specialized area working in these strategic alliances. And I think we're going to see even more and more of these types of partnerships, these types of relationships as we go further into the future. I mean, there's so much technology wrapped around us, software, right? Software's eating the world. There's so much software and all these other capabilities to tie different solutions together to make that bigger, easy button for clients. I think companies will be disadvantaged if they don't take your advice to find counsel that can help them work through agreements that are outside of kind of their day-to-day practice.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's awesome advice.
What's the great question? It's not, I think the favorite question from a lawyer should be, well, what if we blank, as opposed to a lawyer saying, well, you have to blank. right? There's a little bit of a difference between being creative with a strategic approach and just doing the way things that we've always done.
Yeah.
That's definitely a balance, man. That's
No
a great
doubt.
question.
No doubt. Well, Chris, it's been awesome checking in with you. I appreciate your insights. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to having you as a contributor on the Partnernomics Show. So thank you so much for coming along for the ride.
Mark, I'd be honored. I appreciate you, buddy.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Take care. God bless. Yep.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Partnernomics Show. Don't forget to subscribe to get the newest episodes at thepartnernomicsshow.com. Special thanks to our sponsors, Iolite. To learn more about Iolite, visit iolitepro.com. And Partnernomics, the science of partnering. To learn more about the suite of Partnernomics courses, coaching programs, and consulting services, visit partnernomics.com. See you on the next episode.